A massive grizzly bear emerges from the mist, but she isn't hunting. In her jaws, she carries something limp, her own injured cub. She walks through the forest, not toward safety, but toward a stranger. What happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about wild animals and the power of silent trust. This is the story of a man who lived alone in the woods, and the mother bear who came to his doorstep, not with rage, but with hope. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. These stories remind us that sometimes the wild reaches out, and when we listen, lives can change. In a remote valley surrounded by ancient trees and wind-whipped pine needles, Benjamin lived in solitude. His cabin, built with his own hands, rested quietly at the edge of a vast temperate forest, a place untouched by cities, where moss blanketed trunks like velvet and wildflowers pushed through cracked stones each spring. For years, this was his rhythm, mending fences, tending to his orchard, chopping wood before the first frost. His only neighbors were deer tracks and distant bird song. He didn't miss the world he'd left behind. But on one particular morning, the world came to him, in a way he would never forget. The sky was heavy, a blanket of low gray clouds pressing down on the treetops. Fog hung between the branches like a living thing. Benjamin stood on his porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, when he noticed movement near the edge of the woods. At first, he thought it was a moose, something large, but then it stepped into view, and his chest tightened. It was a grizzly bear. She moved slowly, heavily. Her fur, once golden brown, was matted and damp. Between her jaws hung a limp shape, dangling like a rag doll. Benjamin narrowed his eyes. It was a cub. Her cub. Injured. Bleeding. She reached the clearing before his porch and stopped. Not 10 yards away. The forest held its breath. Her eyes met his. Deep. Dark. Unreadable. But something passed between them in that silence. Not aggression, not fear, but something closer to pleading. Then, gently, she placed the cub on the ground. She didn't growl, didn't threaten. She took one slow step back. Benjamin didn't move. He had spent his life respecting wild animals. You let them be. You never interfered. But this was different. This wasn't an encounter. It was a choice, a message, a test of trust. The cub didn't move. His side was gashed open, fur stained red. One leg was twisted unnaturally. His breathing was shallow, wheezing through blood and pain. And the mother waited. Benjamin's pulse thudded in his ears as he stepped forward, slowly, hands visible. He crouched beside the small body. The cub flinched at his touch, but barely. Too weak to resist, too hurt to fear. Benjamin glanced back at the bear. She stood still as stone, her massive frame half shrouded in fog, her ears twitching. She did nothing. She just watched. Benjamin made a decision, one he could never take back. He lifted the cub, gently, like cradling fire, and carried him toward the cabin. Behind him, the grizzly didn't move. She stayed at the forest's edge, a silent sentinel. And in that moment, Benjamin understood something primal and humbling. She had trusted him with her child. But what happens when you bring the wild into your home? And what if you're not enough to save it? The air inside the cabin was warm but tense. Benjamin laid the injured cub atop a thick wool blanket on his table, careful not to jostle the shattered leg or the deep gash along its side. Blood matted the cub's fur. His breathing was shallow and erratic, chest fluttering with effort. Benjamin's hands, usually steady with an axe or plow, trembled slightly as he wrapped another towel around the tiny body. He looked up. Through the window, across the field of wet grass and thin mist, the grizzly mother still stood, a dark shape between trees. She hadn't moved, not an inch. Benjamin couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting, not for her cub to return, but for him to do something. He grabbed his phone and dialed the only person he could trust with something like this. Sarah Green, wildlife biologist, field medic, the kind of person who would crawl through a storm drain to save a hawk with a broken wing. They'd crossed paths years ago when she relocated a porcupine from his orchard. When she answered, Benjamin didn't waste a word. "Sarah, I need your help. Now." A pause. "What is it?" "A grizzly cub. Hurt bad. And the mother brought him to me." Silence on the other end. Then, softly, "I'm on my way. Don't leave him alone." Benjamin returned to the cub, checking his pulse. Faint, but there. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound was deep. Bone might be exposed. Infection was a matter of hours, maybe less. He poured warm water into a basin, cleaned the gash as best he could, and covered it with clean gauze from a first aid kit he hadn't touched in years. The cub whimpered faintly, a pitiful, high-pitched sound that twisted something deep in Benjamin's chest. "You hold on, little one," he muttered. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees. The mother bear had sat down. An hour passed, maybe more. The tea on the stove had gone cold. Benjamin didn't move from the cub's side. Every now and then, the little body would twitch, a reflex or a signal of pain, or maybe both. When headlights appeared through the fog, he almost wept. Sarah didn't even knock. She burst in carrying a worn duffel bag of supplies and dropped to her knees beside the table. She took one look at the cub and got to work. Broken foreleg, laceration near the ribs, high fever. But he's still fighting. Benjamin handed her the supplies without speaking. Her hands moved like clockwork, cleaning, stitching, injecting fluids, applying an emergency splint. Outside, the wind picked up. Sarah paused only once to glance through the window. "She's still there?" Benjamin nodded. "She brought him to you?" she asked. "Walked right up to the porch." Sarah's voice was quiet. "That's not instinct. That's something else." They worked through the next hour in silence, surrounded by wood, wool, and the faint crackle of the fire. The cub was still alive, still breathing. A bear had crossed a line that day, and Benjamin had crossed it back. But night was falling, and with it came silence, shadows, and the long hours of waiting. Night settled over the forest like a weight. The last of the gray sky faded, and the only light in Benjamin's cabin came from the fire and a dim oil lamp above the table. The cub lay still beneath a stack of thick towels and fleece, his breathing ragged but present. Sarah remained crouched beside him, taking vitals, adjusting the splint she'd improvised with pine shims and gauze. Benjamin stood nearby, arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring through the window into the dark. "She hasn't left," he murmured. Sarah didn't need to look. She knew. She could feel it. That quiet presence at the tree line had become part of the rhythm now, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The mother bear hadn't moved since sunset. She was more silhouette than beast now, cloaked in fog and shadow. But her eyes, somehow, they still caught the firelight. "She's not pacing, not anxious," Sarah said. "She trusts you." Benjamin nodded, slowly. "She shouldn't. I've never done anything like this before." "You didn't have to," Sarah replied. "You said yes when she asked." The cub stirred, just slightly, a soft twitch in his paw. Sarah leaned in. Respirations still shallow, but stronger than an hour ago. They worked in shifts through the night. Every 30 minutes, Sarah injected fluids and checked the bandages. Benjamin rotated the warm packs near the cub's torso, reheated water, and kept the fire steady. At one point, just past midnight, the cub let out a soft cry, high and short, almost like a puppy's yelp. His eyes opened for the first time since Sarah arrived, just barely. "Hey," Benjamin whispered, crouching down. "You're still with us." The cub blinked once, then again. His nose twitched, trying to make sense of unfamiliar smells. Pine wood, smoke, human sweat, antiseptic, and something else. Something older, wilder. Benjamin opened the door just a crack. The cold poured in like a ghost. The mother was still there. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He simply held the door open for 1 second longer than he needed to. Then he closed it. Inside, warmth returned. The cub let out a long exhale, his breath curling softly in the air. Sarah leaned back against the wall. Her eyes were tired but alive. "He's not out of danger, but he's not giving up either." They sat in silence for a while. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, owls called from high branches. The weight of the day began to settle into their bones. Benjamin reached over and gently covered the cub with another towel. "Do you think he'll make it?" Sarah looked at the tiny rise and fall of the cub's chest, the pale bandage wrapped tightly around his leg, the smudges of dried blood still clinging to his fur. "I don't know," she said, "but I've never seen anything like this. A wild bear brought you her cub. She chose you." Benjamin nodded, his eyes never leaving the small creature on the table. "Then I'll fight for him," he said softly. As hard as she did. As the first light of morning crept through the trees, something in the cub began to change, and hope returned to the cabin. Dawn broke quietly over the forest. No fanfare, no golden rays or bird song, just a subtle lightening of the sky, turning black into blue and mist into steam above the frosted ground. Inside the cabin, It was still warm from the fire that had burned through the night. Sarah lay curled in a chair near the hearth, wrapped in an old blanket, her head tilted back in exhausted sleep. Benjamin hadn't slept. He sat at the table, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the cub who had become the fragile center of his world. Something was different now. The rise and fall of the cub's chest was no longer shallow and desperate. It had rhythm, the kind that spoke of strength, however slight. His ears twitched when the floor creaked beneath Benjamin's boots. His nose flared as if tasting the changing air. Then, a moment so small it might have been missed, the cub moved. Not a flinch, not a twitch. He shifted. Slowly, with the awkwardness of something unsure of its own weight, he tried to roll to his side. A weak paw stretched forward, feeling the edge of the blanket. His head lifted, just an inch, and his eyes opened. Clearer this time, still glazed with pain, but awake. Benjamin froze. He leaned in slowly, unsure whether to speak, whether to call for Sarah. But he didn't have to. She stirred behind him, and in a few seconds was at his side. She knelt again, brushing the cub's fur gently with the back of her hand. "He's alert," she said quietly. "Really alert." The cub let out a sound, not a cry, but something halfway between a groan and a sigh. Then he lowered his head and rested again. "That," Sarah whispered, "is what survival looks like." They checked his temperature, improved, monitored his pulse, steady, switched out his fluids, cleaned the wound, and rewrapped the splint. He winced, but didn't resist. His body, small as it was trying. Benjamin stepped outside to breathe. The fog had lifted. The trees stood tall and motionless, bathed in the soft blue light of morning. And there, in the exact same place, was the mother bear, still, watching, waiting. He raised a hand slightly, not in greeting, but in acknowledgement. She blinked slowly, her breath steaming in the cool air. Benjamin didn't know what she felt. Relief? Trust? Worry? But he felt something in return. A heaviness lifting from his chest. A new kind of understanding settling into place. Back inside, Sarah was preparing a mixture of warm milk, water, and electrolyte solution in a bottle with a long rubber nipple. "Think he'll take it?" Benjamin asked. "Only one way to find out." She cradled the cub gently and brought the bottle close. At first, he turned his head weakly, but then his nose caught the scent. His tongue flicked out, uncertain. Then he latched. Slow, hesitant. But he drank. Benjamin turned away, blinking fast. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper. That ancient, aching joy of seeing life insist on itself. He looked out the window once more. The mother bear hadn't moved. But for the first time, Benjamin swore he saw her shift her weight, ever so slightly, as if she too had felt a reason to breathe again. The cub was stronger, but now came the hardest part, the choice between keeping him safe or letting him go. The cabin felt different now. It was still quiet, still filled with the scent of pine and smoke and warm wool, but the air had changed. Where fear once lingered in the corners, fear of loss, of failure, of helplessness. Now there was something softer. Acceptance. The cub, who Sarah had begun calling Ash after the silver-gray streak on his nose, was no longer struggling to breathe. His eyes followed movement. His ears perked at sound. He drank eagerly and even let out small, startled huffs when the fire crackled too loudly. He was healing. Sarah stayed another full day to monitor his progress, checking for infection, assessing neurological response, testing reflexes in his hind legs. The results were promising. "He's out of danger," she said the next morning, setting down her stethoscope. "He's not ready for the wild yet, but he will be." Benjamin didn't answer. He just nodded. Outside, the mother bear was gone. For the first time since she had appeared, the spot near the tree line was empty. The snow where she had stood was packed down in a deep, oval-shaped depression, and around it were massive paw prints heading back into the forest. "She left," Benjamin said quietly. Sarah stood beside him. "She waited as long as she needed to." The silence that followed was not sad. It was full, as though something sacred had passed between species, and both had honored it. Later that day, Sarah packed up her bag and rechecked Ash's splint one final time. "He'll need a few more weeks," she said. "Then we'll have to take him back. Let his mother find him again." Benjamin didn't respond right away. He was watching Ash sleep near the hearth, curled like a dog, one paw twitching in a dream. "You're sure she'll come back?" "She will," Sarah replied. "She knows this forest better than we ever could. She'll smell him, hear him. She'll find him." Benjamin swallowed hard. "And if she doesn't?" Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen more rescues than she could count, and more failures than she liked to admit. "Then he'll grow without her. But at least he'll have a chance, and that's more than most get." That night, Benjamin sat by the fire alone, Ash sleeping beside him. He ran his fingers through the soft fur behind the cub's ear and whispered, "I wish I could keep you." But he knew better. Ash didn't belong to him. He never had. He belonged to the trees, to the wind and rain and mud and moonlight, to a world that Benjamin could watch and protect, but never possess. So he began to prepare. Over the next few days, he helped Ash practice walking with his splint. He cleared a small trail outside the cabin where the cub could move safely. He rationed the milk and slowly transitioned to softened berries and scraps of smoked fish. Ash grew stronger, faster, braver, and Benjamin felt something inside him grow too, a sense of peace. The forest had given him a moment, rare and raw and full of meaning. Soon it would ask him to give it back. The time had come, one final journey into the woods, and one final act of trust. The morning was clear and still. No fog, no wind, just a hush over the trees, as if the forest itself was waiting. Benjamin wrapped Ash in a thick wool blanket, the same one that had covered him the night he almost died. Now, the cub's eyes were wide open, alert, scanning the world beyond the cabin door. His splint remained, but he walked confidently in short bursts, tail swaying like a metronome of defiance. Sarah had returned just after sunrise. She didn't bring a crate. She knew Benjamin wouldn't allow this to feel like a capture. This wasn't a removal. It was a homecoming. They loaded a small pack with supplies, extra formula, berries, antiseptic, just in case. Benjamin tucked it over his shoulder, then gently lifted Ash in his arms. The cub didn't struggle. He pressed his face to Benjamin's chest, blinking slowly, warm breath against wool. They walked without speaking. The trail behind the cabin was narrow, winding through tall ferns and over damp soil. Birds flitted overhead, and the smell of wet pine filled the air. A squirrel scolded them from a branch, then darted out of sight. After a mile, they reached a small glade, the exact spot where the mother bear had first emerged. The snow was gone now, replaced by soft earth and budding wildflowers. Sarah turned and nodded. "This is the place." Benjamin knelt and set Ash down gently. The cub sniffed the ground, paced in a small circle, then looked back. Not frightened, not confused, just waiting. Benjamin sat beside him. His hand brushed the cub's back, slow and deliberate, memorizing the texture of the fur, the rise and fall of his tiny frame. "He's ready," Sarah said softly. But Benjamin wasn't. He took a deep breath. The air felt heavier now. "Do you think she's near?" he asked. "She's a mother," Sarah replied. "She never stopped being near." They waited. 10 minutes. 20. The wind shifted. Ash perked up, his nose twitching. He turned toward the trees, ears stiff, body alert. Benjamin stood slowly, following the cub's gaze. Then, like a shadow melting from the trunks, she appeared. The mother bear stepped into the glade without a sound. Larger than he remembered, more majestic in daylight, she moved with certainty. Her eyes locked onto Ash, then flicked to Benjamin. There was no hesitation, no fear. She had come for him. Ash gave a low grunt, almost a chirp, and stepped forward. His steps were still unsure, but he didn't stop. He reached her front paws and nosed at her fur. The grizzly dipped her head and gently licked the top of his skull. Benjamin didn't breathe. She examined him, sniffed his bandaged leg, his back, his ears. Then, satisfied, she turned in a slow arc, nudging him to follow. Ash looked back one last time, just once. Benjamin raised a hand. "Go on," he whispered. Ash turned and followed her into the trees. They vanished between trunks and leaves, swallowed by the world they belonged to. Benjamin remained standing for a long time. Sarah eventually stepped beside him. "You did something extraordinary." He shook his head. "I just listened." "No," she said. "You believed." As they walked back to the cabin, Benjamin looked over his shoulder, half hoping for one last glance. But the forest was quiet again. Still, something had changed. He hadn't lost something that day. He had become part of it. The forest moved on. But the story of a man and a bear would leave its mark far beyond the trees. Weeks passed. Spring arrived in earnest, and with it came rain, steady, cleansing, and soft. The trees unfurled their leaves like hands stretching toward sunlight. The forest breathed again, alive and vibrant. Benjamin returned to his quiet life. He still rose at dawn, still drank tea on the porch, still repaired fences and tended his orchard. But something inside him had shifted. The silence wasn't quite the same anymore. It wasn't emptiness. It was presence. The presence of something deeper, something sacred. Ash and his mother were gone, melted back into the wild. But now and then, Benjamin saw signs. Once, near the glade, he found a patch of earth disturbed, small paw prints beside larger ones. Another time, near the creek, he spotted fish bones cleanly picked and a tuft of fur snagged on a branch. He never tried to follow them. They had given him a gift, and he had given them their freedom. One afternoon, as he walked back from checking his traps, he found Sarah standing near the edge of the woods. She held a clipboard in one hand, a GPS device in the other. "I've been monitoring nearby wildlife movements," she said. "Pretty sure I picked up her signal." Benjamin smiled. "She doing okay?" "She's moved deeper into the reserve. Looks like she's teaching him how to dig for roots. He's gaining weight, getting stronger." Benjamin nodded, heart full. Word of what had happened, a grizzly bear bringing her cub to a human, had spread beyond their small region. Sarah, reluctantly, had shared the story with a conservation network. The response was overwhelming. Wildlife experts were stunned. Biologists reached out to study the behavioral implications. Park rangers cited the incident in lectures about the complex intelligence of bears. One magazine called it a quiet miracle in the forest. But Benjamin didn't care about headlines. What mattered to him was the connection that couldn't be measured, the invisible thread between two worlds that had touched just once and changed everything. Later that summer, a local group erected a simple wooden sign at the trailhead near Benjamin's land. Ash's Crossing, Wildlife Recovery Zone. No fanfare, no tourists, just a quiet tribute to a cub who had nearly died and the wild mother who had placed her trust in a man of the woods. Benjamin would pass the sign each week on his way to collect apples. He'd stop for a moment, press his palm gently against the wood, then move on. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he would sit on his porch and watch the edge of the forest. He never saw the bear again. But that wasn't the point. The forest didn't owe him anything, and neither did the cub. What had passed between them was unspoken, unrepeated, and unforgettable. Sometimes the wild reaches out, not with growls or claws, but with trust. And when we're brave enough to listen, not to control, not to tame, but to simply be there, we become part of something ancient and beautiful. If this story inspired you, remember, kindness doesn't end at the edge of the forest. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who believes in second chances. Because even the smallest life and the quietest choice can echo through the trees forever. He was no more than a few weeks old, just a baby grizzly bear, alone, trembling, sitting in the middle of an airstrip, with planes landing right over his head. No mother in sight, no forest, no safety, just a wall of noise, burning asphalt, and 100 feet of emptiness in every direction. But then, someone saw him, and what happened next will not only break your heart, it will make you believe in compassion again. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. We bring you true, powerful stories that show what love looks like, even in the wild. The airport was still waking up. Ground crews rolled out carts, a fuel truck hissed, and out on the far edge of the tarmac, near the old emergency access road, a technician named Eli Booker spotted something strange. It wasn't moving. At first he thought it was a chunk of tire rubber or a small bag tossed from a cart. But then it shifted and blinked. Eli froze. There, sitting on the faded yellow line in the middle of the asphalt, was a baby grizzly bear. Not a teenager, not even a cub with weight. A baby, small, round, shaking. Its fur was dusty and thin, its back legs tucked beneath its belly like it didn't know what else to do. It looked around slowly and made no sound. Eli had worked that strip for 15 years. He'd seen deer break fences, coyotes wander in at night. Once, even a hawk drop a snake onto a landing pad. But this didn't make sense. There were no woods nearby, no mountains, only chain-link fences, concrete, noise, and wind. No reason for a grizzly cub to be here, and no sign of its mother. He called it in. "Tower, we've got a live animal on the runway." No, not a bird, not a dog. A bear cub. Yeah, a real one. The tower held all incoming flights. Security rolled in within minutes. Sirens off, but hearts pounding. Eli stepped slowly toward the cub. It didn't run, didn't flinch. It just sat there, eyes big and dark. Someone whispered, "Where the hell did he come from?" No one knew. What they did know was that the cub was in danger, not from people, but from the world he had been dropped into. And as the wind swept across the runway, ruffling the baby's fur, Eli did something you're not trained to do at an airport. He took a knee, held out his hand, and said softly, "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" The baby didn't resist when they wrapped him in a thick canvas blanket. He didn't growl, didn't paw, didn't fight. He just let it happen. That was what worried Eli the most. Wild animals, even babies, usually lash out. They scratch, they flee, they scream. But this one? He just stared with those huge black eyes, as if he had already given up. The wildlife officer who arrived was named Dana Crowley, mid-30s, quiet, sharp. She crouched next to the cub, touching the edge of his paw with gloved fingers. No tags, no collar. Definitely not from any wildlife center, she said. And no trauma around the neck. She leaned in closer. Body temp is low. He hasn't eaten in a while. I don't think this cub wandered here. I think someone dropped him. Eli blinked. You mean, like abandoned him? Dana nodded slowly. I think he was transported here. Maybe hidden in a truck, or even a private plane. She looked back at the fence. And left. The words hit Eli hard. The idea that someone would smuggle a grizzly cub, then dump him like luggage, it made his jaw tighten. They loaded the cub into a crate lined with thermal blankets. He didn't make a sound, didn't even curl up, just laid there, still, breathing, barely. Back in the wildlife van, Dana turned to Eli. Do you want to name him? She asked. Eli raised an eyebrow. "Why me?" "You're the first person he saw," she said. "Might matter later." He looked at the cub, wrapped up like something rescued from a storm. "Jet," Eli said, half laughing. "It's stupid, but—" Dana smiled. "Jet it is." They drove in silence. Every few minutes, Dana checked the vitals. Jet's chest rose, faintly, then fell. "He shouldn't be alive," she said softly. "Not in that heat, not with no food, not on that runway." And yet, he was. At the Wildlife Center, they brought Jet into the emergency care room. He was placed on warm pads, given fluids, and monitored around the clock. No one left his side for hours. The next day, he lifted his head. Only slightly, but enough to look around. And for the first time since they'd found him, Jet made a sound. A soft, hoarse squeak. Half whimper, half breath. And somehow, that little sound shook them more than any roar ever could. Jet wasn't expected to make it through the first week. He was dehydrated, malnourished, underweight. His legs trembled when he tried to stand. His claws were chipped, not from play, but from trying to escape something before he was left behind. But somehow, day by day, he held on. He started drinking formula. He whimpered less in his sleep. And when Dana walked into the room, he would lift his head. That tiny act, that simple acknowledgement, felt like a miracle. Eli visited the center after his shift every few days. At first, he stayed by the door, then by the window. And finally, one evening, he walked into the room with the Jet asleep on a heated pad. Dana looked up. "He remembers you," she said. Eli raised an eyebrow. "He does," she insisted. "I've seen it. When you speak, his ears move. He calms down." Eli stepped closer. Jet stirred slightly, then exhaled a breath and settled again. It was enough. They didn't talk much that night, just sat. Eli in a chair, Dana leaning against the wall, Jet between them, breathing. The center was small, not built for long-term rehabilitation of predators like grizzlies. They had protocols, deadlines, red tape. "Once he's strong enough," Dana said, "they'll want to move him to the larger facility up north." Eli nodded, slowly. "And then what?" She shrugged. "If he can't survive alone, they may classify him as non-releasable." Eli didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. But Jet was growing. Each day, stronger. He learned to balance on all fours. He licked formula from a dish. He began exploring, clumsy but curious, like a cub should. And one morning, when Dana opened the door, he ran, right past her legs, down the hall, straight into Eli's boots. He didn't run to escape. He ran to play. The three of them stood there, shocked. Jet wobbling around Eli's feet, letting out a sharp baby growl like it was a joke. Dana laughed. Eli smiled for the first time in weeks. "Guess he picked his person," she said. They still didn't know where Jet came from. Still no leads, no security footage, no witness. Only one thing was clear. Someone gave up on him. But he hadn't given up on anyone. And that meant something. Jet was growing fast. He had nearly doubled in weight. His legs, once shaky, now carried him confidently through the narrow corridors of the Wildlife Center. He explored the staff rooms, pawed at windows, climbed over folded towels like they were logs. But as Jet grew stronger, so did the pressure. One afternoon, Dana walked into her office to find a beige file on her desk. It was stamped with a red label, "Transfer Pending." Inside were the terms, Jet was to be moved to Wild Track North, a facility 3 hours away. Larger staff, more space, more appropriate containment for dangerous species. Dana stared at the words, non-releasable, not fit for wilderness reintegration, human comforted behavior developing. She closed the folder and just sat. Eli showed up that evening, bringing an old dog blanket he thought Jet might like. He found Dana in the observation room, silent, arms crossed. "What's wrong?" She slid the folder toward him. He read the first page, then the second. His jaw tightened. "So they're gonna lock him up because he let us help him?" Dana didn't respond. Jet was asleep in the other room, curled on a heating pad with his paw draped over a stuffed bear. He looked so small, so harmless, so normal. "They won't kill him," Dana finally said, "but he won't live free. He'll be in an enclosure, alone, for years, maybe forever." Eli shook his head. "He didn't ask for this. We made him trust us." She looked down. "I know." That night, Jet woke up crying, a soft, high-pitched yelp, the kind animals make in dreams when something chases them even in sleep. Eli was already in the room. He sat on the floor beside him. Jet curled into his lap, whimpering, then settling. And something in Eli's chest cracked open, not like a break, more like a decision. The next morning, Dana submitted a counterproposal. She requested a temporary hold on the transfer, citing Jet's trauma recovery, developmental needs, and early-stage bonding. She included new photos, progress reports, testimonies from staff, and a single handwritten note from Eli. "He survived because he trusted us. If we punish him for that now, we're worse than whoever left him behind." No one knew if it would work, but they had to try. Because Jet wasn't just some bear behind glass. He was a mirror, and when they looked into his eyes, they saw the best or worst of themselves. The call came on a Tuesday. Dana had been checking Jet's vitals. He was chewing on the laces of Eli's boot, his new favorite toy. The ringtone echoed through the small clinic. She picked it up without hope. On the other end, Wildlife Department, Regional Director. They spoke for less than 2 minutes, and when she hung up, she didn't speak. She just sat down on the floor. Jet looked up at her. Eli stepped into the doorway. "What?" Dana looked at him, eyes unreadable. Then she exhaled. "They approved it." Silence. Then, "They approved? What?" "The petition," she said slowly. "The hold, the observation period, Jet stays." Eli blinked. His shoulders dropped. Then he let out the kind of laugh that comes from pressure breaking open. Jet grunted, confused by the noise, then pounced on Eli's shoelace again. Like nothing had changed, but everything had. They celebrated the only way they knew how. By laying out a clean pile of blankets, a shallow tub of warm water, and Eli's flannel shirt. Jet's new comfort object. Jet rolled in the blankets, splashed once in the tub, then promptly fell asleep in Eli's lap. Later that week, the center opened the back enclosure for Jet to explore. It was forested, fenced, open to the sky. Jet stood at the threshold, hesitant, then looked at Eli, and only after seeing him smile did he step outside. It was the first time Jet touched grass since he was found on that runway. Eli and Dana sat on the bench nearby. No words, just the rustle of leaves, the chirp of birds, the quiet sound of one small life starting again. But nothing was guaranteed. Jet still had to grow, still had to learn, still had to prove that he could one day return to the wild. But now he had time. Time to heal, time to play, time to simply be a bear again. And for Eli, who once thought his life was just asphalt and engines, this little creature had shown him something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. That night, as Jet slept curled beside his stuffed toy, Eli whispered, "You made it, little guy. Now let's see who you become." Jet was no longer small. His paws had thickened, his shoulders widened, and the soft whimper of a cub had deepened into a low, curious grunt. But he hadn't lost what made him Jet. He still rolled in the leaves like a puppy, still splashed in the water tub when it rained, still perked up when Eli whistled at the gate. But with every inch he gained, so did the questions. When do you let go? How do you know when he's ready? Jet was approaching 9 months. In the wild, a grizzly cub that age would still be with its mother, learning to forage, to sense danger, to climb, to fight if needed. But Jet had no mother, just instinct, and the two humans who had done their best to fill in the silence where lessons should have been. That's why they staged the trial, a controlled wilderness test, deep in the back of the Wildlife Center grounds. 2 acres of open terrain, dense brush, fallen logs, wild scents. They released Jet at sunrise and waited. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then the radio crackled. "He's hunting." Dana and Eli leaned in. Not running, not panicking. "He's tracking insects. Tore open a log. Ate something." Eli smiled. Smart boy. But then, static. Then a new voice. "We've got trouble. Black bear, adult female, just crossed into the area." Dana's heart stopped. Jet wasn't trained for confrontation. He didn't know how to assert or retreat or posture. He didn't know fear the way wild bears do. They watched through the camera feed as the female appeared, lumbering, nose low. Jet froze. She stopped. 2 shapes in a standstill. Jet took 1 step back. The female lowered her head. Then Jet did something no one expected. He growled, not out of anger, but out of memory. The noise was awkward, young, but unmistakable, and the female turned and walked away. Jet didn't chase. He just stood there, still, breathing heavy. Dana covered her mouth. Eli whispered, "He's learning." They brought him back that evening. He was tired, dusty, but unhurt. And when he saw Eli, he pressed his big head into the man's chest, then flopped down with a huff like he was proud of himself. That night, the center logged the moment as a milestone. First independent interaction with another wild bear. No aggression, no injury, successful response. Eli didn't care about the form. He just sat beside Jet's enclosure and whispered, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're becoming." The decision didn't come in a meeting, not in an email, not in a report. It came on a quiet morning, 6 weeks after the encounter with the black bear. Jet was standing at the edge of the outer enclosure, watching birds in the treetops, not trying to chase them, just watching, observing, still. Dana walked up beside Eli and said the words that he'd known were coming. "He's ready." Eli nodded. He didn't speak, just pressed his lips together and watched Jet sniff the wind like he could smell something calling him. The release site was 40 miles north. Private land, unmarked, miles from any road, thick with forest, alive with the sound of rivers, wind, and everything Jet had never truly known. They drove at dawn. Jet sat quietly in his crate, not scared, not restless, just alert. When they arrived, Eli opened the gate. Jet didn't bolt. He stepped out slowly. The sun hit his fur. Birdsong floated through the trees. A squirrel ran past. Jet didn't chase it. He just stood there, breathing. Eli crouched low. Jet turned back and looked at him one last time. Their eyes locked. Not like man and animal, not like keeper and captive, but like two beings who had walked something hard together and made it out. Then Jet turned and walked into the trees, without fear, without hesitation, and without looking back. Eli stayed for a while, didn't cry, didn't speak. He just sat on a log and listened. Listened to the forest slowly close behind Jet, like it was welcoming him home. Back at the center, Jet's enclosure was left empty, but not erased. A plaque was installed beside it. It didn't say much, just Jet, rescued from the runway, returned to the wild, 2024. A few weeks later, a trail camera captured a blurry figure miles from the release site, a grizzly moving confidently through the pines, young, alone, strong, and someone at the station simply said, "He's still out there." And Eli? He went back to work. Same boots, same routine. But sometimes, just before the sun went down, he'd find himself staring at the horizon and whispering, "Fly safe, kid." If this story touched your heart, if Jet's survival reminded you of what love, patience, and quiet courage can do, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because sometimes all it takes is one human who chooses not to look away.